Hi gang, Scott here. Welcome to InPost. Thanks for joining me today. Today's video is a live edit, live in air quotes. I'm not live streaming. What I am doing is taking a photo I captured from the In the Field episode you saw earlier this week and starting the processing on it. I've not done any work on this at all. Just going to bring it up in the machine and start working on it. So this will be, really a live working session, stream of consciousness. I'll just share what I'm thinking, why I'm doing certain things I'm doing, and we'll see what we emerge with at the end. And hopefully it's a pretty good photo. That's the goal, right? So let's get into it. This is the photo I've chosen to work with today. If you watched In the Field earlier in the week, you'll recognize this. And there were some compositional choices I made in the field. There are certain things I knew were going to be needed in post-processing, and doing a quick image assessment. Certainly, if you watch the In the Field, you know about these buildings are quite warped up on the right side. And I gave myself a little breathing room on the composition to compensate for that so we don't lose too many pixels on the right-hand edge. And as I'm looking at this now, the left-hand side feels kind of empty, so I'm thinking crop. We'll see where that lands. And then overall, the scene's a little underexposed. Certainly the foreground is darker than the sky in the background. Not that there's anything interesting in that sky, but there's overall exposure balance that needs to be done. And what I really want to accentuate is these little curves of waves. This is the interesting part. This part here is where I want my viewers' eyes to go. And then the rest, we'll just see how things come along. So let's start with our basics here. And open up the basics panel. I generally like to work with Adobe Landscape to start with. Gives me a little better of a starting point. Now, white balance is going to be an interesting choice here. I usually like my seafoam to be white, and like the tips here. And I'm skimming around. There's a lot of blue bouncing around in this scene. That's already better. Yeah. Let's fiddle a little bit. If I make that a little bit warmer versus a little bit cooler. This is starting to push reality farther than I'd like to go, at least now. This is more appropriate for what was going on scene. And once I open up exposure in the foreground, that should help out with the white part. So we'll keep the custom white balance, and then we'll start with an auto tone. Already much better. Actually, a whole lot better. That's actually kind of surprised how well that worked. Okay, great. And I'm going to stop right there with the getting the basics, because really the next step for me is dealing with the warped buildings. If I can't rein those in and get those at least relatively well taken care of here in Lightroom, I don't want to expend a lot of extra effort on the processing for the rest of the scene, with that being like the sore thumb. So let's jump down into Transform. Actually, double check my lens corrections are on. Yes, they are. That happens automatically for me, courtesy of the Sony cameras. And let's just see about what auto does for me. Not a whole lot. It's not really seeing the buildings as particularly important in this scene. So let's do a guided thing here. And I certainly want a horizon line that is straight. So let's get a guided horizon. Let's do that. And now here, let's see about maybe this building here. I'm okay with some warping, but just not as much as what's there. So we'll click that spot. We'll come down to the bottom half of that. What did I click on? I clicked on kind of that seamed building. So tracing that down. Looks like I lose a little bit of track of it after here. So maybe right around there is well enough. Getting better. Now that seems to a little like overcorrected a little bit. So I'll try this next building here instead. Let's delete that one. And I'll just try the seam on this building here. Let's do that one. About to say there. That's better. Let's put that tool away and do a quick before and after check on that. Before and after. And not too much of a terrible shift. One more time. Before, after. Where there's some stretching happening in the lower part of the frame. But these are I'll describe these like they're non-recognizable. It's except for those of us that walk this beach all the time and go, hey, that rock doesn't exactly look like that. It's pointier at this side or so forth. That's just not going to enter into a viewer's mind. So I'm good with that amount of adjustment. And I do want to take care of the crop. I don't like where this fence line has ended up. And as I mentioned, this side of the photo, this is just a lot of emptiness out here. So let's take a look at our crop, and I'll do free form on this. I don't mind the fence being there as long as it just kind of exits the frame. Maybe right there. And then here, just pull this in. Let's hit the L key twice. Once, twice. I can really just watch the photo and see what feels good. And the square format, or close to a square format, is feeling pretty good. We have the sky on an upper third. This is still empty, but that's just how it was, and I'm not inclined to drop in any sort of dramatic sky. I don't want to do that. Can't pull it down any farther. I don't want to lose the breathing room around that palm tree. And we're going to call that good. So L key one more time. So back to seeing everything. And that's feeling pretty nice. All right, so next few things to deal with is just some general, back to our basics, getting some general crispness, a little texture, maybe a tiny bit of clarity. I'm really preferring texture a lot more than clarity these days. Clarity can get harsh fast. You see what I mean? It can get crispy. Whereas texture, as I push that farther, it's more intelligent, really. But I liked where I had it before, a little bit higher. That feels good. Let's take care of some exposure balance. So I'm still underexposed overall. Let's nudge exposure to the right. And what happens if I just grab that histogram and start pulling it that way? That's only really affecting the highlights. And the problem is the foreground, which is in shadow. So I'm on the west coast, so the sun I'm facing north. So the sun's coming above camera right. Hadn't even cleared the local hills at this point. So the foreground was entirely in shadow. The shadows are already opened up pretty far. And so if I push those even farther, it starts to get a little washed out overall. Let's try using a graduated filter. Exposure. Drag that up this way. And something I like to do for evening out exposure is first just try the exposure itself. Just push that up some. Not bad. Before and after. Let's feather that out a little farther. And I may not need to do it on this photo, but I'll show you the technique anyway. I will often use a luminance range mask. I'll turn that luminance on. Say, keep those deep shadows deep. So I just tuck the range in just a little tiny bit. And then depending on what I need to do, maybe the smoothness. You can see the difference there here versus here. Wow, that's subtle. I don't know if they're going to come through. Look down in these shadows here. Let me zoom in down here. So you can just see that technique, right? So here's these shadows. If I take the range, let's get smoothness back to where it was. If I take the range and include the shadows, you can see how those shadows get opened up a little bit. If I tighten that range, it keeps those shadows deeper. So putting that luminance range back on. It's keeping the shadows deeper and letting me open up exposure more gradually throughout the rest of the foreground. And it does just give a nice level of control here. And if I push that smoothness to the left, basically telling the tool, be a little more aggressive within the range here. Consider what's outside of the range. It really needs to be a deep shadow, so you can see that difference of how the luminance range looks. And then all added up before and after. That's good. I like that. That's nice. What remains? Okay, so Perhaps a little more color. Now, I don't want to push this very far. This was a pretty empty morning. Not a lot of color other than the color blue bouncing around here. This is pre-sunrise. I've only got that little orange band out here at the horizon. I'm not getting direct light on these rocks, so pushing these in a golden direction, it wouldn't feel accurate to me. But let's visit HSL, and with the oranges, because these rocks, if I use the picker, these should be roughly orange and yellow. Okay. So let's float around here a little bit. We've got, actually these are coming out more yellow based on the toning. Here's our oranges for sure. Then we get up into the sky. The higher up we get into the blues, as we expect. As we get closer to the horizon itself, we shift into the yellows and oranges, and this would be predominantly yellow versus blue here, right? Yellowish on the sand, blue on the water. Okay, couple of ideas here. First, let's take our blues and increase the luminance. Now this is going to affect the sky in an odd way, but I'm really watching the surf. See how the surf is popping? Like that. So I'm going to nudge that there and return to the sky in a little bit. Oranges and yellows. Let's take yellow, push it a little more toward orange. Okay, that's changing the sky. You can see that effect there. Subtle one. Oranges increase saturation a little bit. And so by shifting yellow a little to orange, it means I'm going to be picking up more of these rocks here. And then by increasing the saturation, get a little more color into those rocks. These are tiny changes before and after. I notice it most with the surf. That's fine, not a bad thing. I do want to get some more color in that sky, and I think really just to finish this one off before we get into some final retouching, couple of signposts are really starting to bug me now, is with a temperature adjustment. I do like how Lightroom's temperature change really does a nice job for adding blues. So I've got this pre-staged decrease in temperature, drag a gradient there, push that up a little bit. I don't want to affect the buildings too much. I just want this to be in the upper part of the sky. I can pull that down really far. You see that, very, very blue. Don't want that. Something there. And once again, I'm going to go into those luminance range masks so I'm not affecting the palm trees. So show the range mask, and I can really fine tune where this is going to affect and just have it start to clip off here. Now most of what's up here, let's actually rearrange that, and since we're going to use the luminance range mask, I can be a little more horizontal on that fade. This is going to be very much shadow compared to the highlights in the sky. So if I start decreasing that range, I'll see this effect disappear from the building, from the palm trees. I can tighten that range up a little bit, or the smoothness rather, so that we're not bleeding over into the buildings as much. I'll turn that off. Now there's still a bit of blue happening in there. If I turn that back on, we zoom up into the upper right corner so you can see there's still some affecting the buildings. I'm kind of okay with that, because if this were happening naturally, I was not manually adding some temperature, but if there was a lot of blue happening up here, well, some of that is going to be bounced back down into the scene itself. So I'll just use that luminance range to kind of just keep things in check. And maybe I'll push, actually, let's try smoothness where its default was. That's not bad. Tug that down a little farther and nudge the range away just a little bit. Fine tuning on how much blue to add in there. That feels pretty good there. Let's see that before and after. Now we've got a couple of gradients on here, so we'll see a couple of shifts, the exposure and then the sky. That feels good. All right, so what is remaining now is a few retouches. There are some signposts that are annoying to me, and I think my annoyance level decreases the farther they go into the frame. I get it. This is there's humanity here. There's residences here. There's things going on here. But zooming up in this upper corner, the street signs, gosh, I know that street corner all too well. That one bothers me because it's near the edge and it pulls the eye away. Now, I could consider just cropping, and I might actually attempt that. And then these other ones here, like this one sticking out of the bushes, that's an easy enough job to get rid of, and I'll probably just get rid of it. The don't walk signs or crosswalk signs here, there's only so far I'm willing to go with retouching those away because there is buildings and so forth in the scene. But let's start with some of the easier things here. Let me revisit the crop and see if I can just simply get rid of it with a crop, and how much does that change the photo before and after. I honestly think it feels a little more cramped. This curve, I'm losing that, so I've got to do the retouching on that, and that's more of a challenge in Lightroom. Yeah, I can make it work, but I'll turn to a different tool to do that. What I will do in Lightroom, because these should be pretty straightforward, is we'll switch over to, wrong tool. We'll switch over to our clone, and let me turn off my yellow cursor here, but I'm working with this street sign in the center. And what I want to do is do a single click here so that I can kind of divide and conquer on that line of this little hedge there. And if I can get that done, the rest of it becomes nice and easy. So H key to turn that off again. That's great. And then I can use another sweep to just get rid of the sign. That's good. That's good there. Okay. That same technique should also work for this sign here. Now let's punch in even farther. Command or Control plus. I'll do this 2 times. So I'm way beyond 100%. So things are getting grainy, and that's okay. Right here is what I want to remove. Click once. H key to see where it's sampled. It chose something way out in what I'll call the weeds. And maybe on the other side of that bench is a better sample point. Now this is grainy. I expect it to be grainy. That's okay. I'm just looking to get a rough line up. If I push that feather up there, just right there, H key, turn it off. One more time for that piece. And then maybe a third time. That one's not going to be good. Now I'll take care of the sign as a whole, right? And we'll just sweep all through there. Great. Not terrible, but my feather is pushed up pretty far. So if I pull that feather back down on that pin, that's going to get cleaner. Fine. Take care of the rest. Oh, I'm still on heal. Let's turn off my tool, turn it back on, switch over to heal. Or I should say I was on clone, and now I wanted to be on heal. And then kind of a sweep around the edge of where that was. That did not come out well. Lightroom, where did you sample? My goodness. Why would you do that? All right. And one more for good measure. We'll take that, bring it over here, turn off my pins. And that's looking a little artifacty, but remembering I am zoomed in at, an insane amount. Let's take a look at this at 100%. A little bit of a halo, so I'll want to clean that up. So for this last bit of retouching, I'm going to send this over into Photoshop and use its content-aware tools. Maybe the clone for that signpost in the back. That one may be a more difficult object selection. Let's get this on over into Photoshop. Right-click, edit in, send it over to Photoshop, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, so we are in Photoshop. Let's zoom up in here. There's our signpost. There's our lasso tool to make a selection around this. And then an edit, content-aware fill. That is looking pretty smooth. A little bit of cleanup on the bottom here, maybe. Zoom in there a little bit. And that might be something. Let's see if we can adjust that just with our tools here. where if we subtract from the selection just this little bit here, not too bad. That's enough where it's an easy enough cleanup job with the clone tool. I'm going to accept this because that's a really nice blend there. We'll hit apply. Say OK. And then switch over to our clone tool. Clear the selection, get our clone tool, make that brush a little bit big. And I can sample over here, option click. Make sure I've got my, did I get my selection there? Option, click. Oh, I am on. Let me merge that down. There we go. Now I can see all my pixels. Let's see, option, click. Fill that in a little bit. Take from over here. Fill that in a little bit. One more time from the other side, option clicking to just fill things in. And we're getting pretty close, maybe right around there. One more time. I'm starting to become a perfectionist here. All right, that's going to be good enough considering we're zoomed in at 200%. And speaking of which, I'm going to stay there to deal with this piece. As a matter of fact, punching a little more. Now this signpost, because there's so much other things going on behind it, window frames and so forth, for me, I end up getting better results just using clone stamp and kind of rebuilding these corners here. So I'll show you what I'm going to do on the one side here, and then you can get the idea of how this would play out for the rest of it. So first off, clone stamp, let me choose a harder brush, a little bit more of a harder edge. And I'll start by rebuilding this little bit of window here. So option, and I'll choose this corner right here. And then I can reposition that, shrink it down a little bit. And then right around there seems to be about where the corner should be. Paint that in and come on up a little bit. Right about there. Do the same thing and sample the top corner and rebuild that piece right about there. And this one being careful only to go downward with my brush stroke because I'll take care of this part with what's above it, like right around there. Now keeping in mind, I'm zoomed in at 300%, so this little bits and pieces where there is some bleed on either side, I'm not too worried about, and I can even clean it up doing that. And I'll repeat this through the rest of this. I'll rebuild the other side of it, and then we'll have a completed image, deal off with the bit on the bench at the end. All right, I think we're done with that. And of course, now I start to go into the, oh, well, I can clean up this, I can clean up that. I'm going to stop at this point. Consider the photo is done, cleaned up the major distractions in it. And maybe I'll go tackle that little bit of handrail toward the edge now that I've gotten rid of the signpost. But that's the processing there. So yeah, let's take a look at what we started with. Did some basic processing on it. And then dealt with a little bit of cleanup, getting rid of a couple of distracting elements. So there you go. That was a bit of a long one. If you stuck with me, thanks very much. You hung in there, and I hope you picked up a few tips and techniques along the way that'll help you out. Got questions? Go ahead and drop them below. And until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Have fun.